and welcome to the Concrete Connection Project podcast. And we're not down here on the streets of Adelaide performing on every single street raising money and awareness for mental health. I'm actually in Tasmania right now. Finished up my performances at the Festival of Voices, so I thought I'd pop into the Kenyani Folk Club at the Fern Tavern and visit Daniel J. Townsend.
G'day.
Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Now, we've crossed paths many times across both our careers, including very, very many years ago, I reckon at the Royal Oak Hotel in Launceston, performing with the Timbers and yourself with Invisible Boy.
Yeah, that would have been maybe 2008, maybe 2009.
I'm so bad with years, I'm not too sure.
I think we were like 7 years old.
Yeah, it's just babies. Just traversing the streets of Launceston and the folk music scene.
Yeah.
And so you were born in Tasmania, but you actually grew up in Adelaide.
Yeah.
And now you're back in Tasmania.
Yeah, a little known fact, I spent a lot of my life in South Australia, but I was an idiot. I didn't know who I was. I was chatting with a friend. I was over in Adelaide just recently, and I really didn't know who I was. And so I would just sort of latch on to other people's opinions and other people's tastes. And from the outside, it looked like I was a fairly content teenager, but from the inside, I didn't really know what was going on. So I don't tell many stories about living in Adelaide because I feel like I've never really been there.
Oh, wow.
It took me a long time to grow up and work out who I was.
Well, that's interesting you say that because, following you on social media now, you seem to have a good grasp of who you are. Is that a solid observation, do you think?
Sure. I'm a late starter, slow bloomer. Yeah, it wasn't really until I was in my late 20s, I reckon, that I worked out who I was. But having said that, I kind of knew before the age of 10, and then I either forgot or put it somewhere else. And I got to my late 20s and, yeah, the wheels fell off, well and truly. And, went to a doctor and had a chat and did the things. And as part of that breakdown and breakthrough, I guess, a lot of that was getting back to who I was before I moved to South Australia. Because I went to 4 different schools in 18 months over 3 states, and by the time I got to the 4th school, I was kind of sick of telling people who I was, so I kind of put the things that I cared about in a figurative box, and just forgot about them. And by the time I was in my late 20s, I was very confused and had to start all over again. I'd say I know who I am pretty well now, but it was a long road to get there.
You had to, go through the old dusty books to find it.
Totally. It really felt like it felt like getting in a time machine, and going back to what was I like when I was 8? What did I do? Well, I drew pictures all the time, and I wrote songs, and I wrote stories, and I mostly sat in a quiet room on the carpeted floor with the sun on my back, and that was my happy place. And it still is. If you come to my house now, I've got a beautiful carpeted front room, full of sunlight. That's where all my recording gear is. That's where my guitars are on the floor. That's where I live.
Well, that's awesome. Now, do we need to sign a release form for people behind us here? Are they in the shot?
Famous.
They're in the shot. We'll close it up so we don't need to make them sign a release form to release this. But yeah, you are a bit of a wordsmith, and I find your posts online, really, I don't know, quite well thought out, and even like poetry, there's stories, and I find there a lot of efforts put in there. What are your inspirations with lyrics, poetry, words, things like that, stories?
I really have 2 inspirations. One is the journey that I've been on that I've just told you about. Means I'm really passionate and territorial for creatives, keeping a safe space for them. It was such shame for me growing up being a poet. I didn't even know that's what I was until my 30s. But I would write things down and I'd hide them in my drawers, and I'd write songs and I'd hide them in my drawers, and I don't know, somehow I'd picked up that in this country it was something to be ashamed of if that's what you were into, if that's who you were. It was almost like being in the closet, and no one ever said you shouldn't do that, but it was really loud. It was really clear. So anything that I write that's about creativity or being an artist or, pressing into the unknown, that really comes from a deep place within me, which I'm very passionate about. So a lot of my work is about that. And the rest of it is about place. Joseph Campbell says it is the function of the artist to mythologize the environment and the world. And that's very much the way I do things. You know, your favorite places aren't just places, they're a collection of stories. You know, I live near Port Noarlunga Jetty in South Australia. That's not just a collection of badly aged wood. You know, it's really important for people. And we'll prop it up for as long as we can because it's full of stories, not just full of wood. You know? And here we are on the side of what used to be called Mount Wellington, and as we've discovered is actually called Kanunyi. That's a special place for people in Hobart. They just call it the mountain. And if someone was to say, maybe we should mine it, or maybe we should stick a cable car up the side of it, people are really emotionally attached to it. It's not just a collection of rocks, it's a living thing. So my poetry is very much about finding the life in places and helping people to connect with that in a way that is transformative for them, helps them to slow down and helps them to love where they are.
Wow. I'm loving this podcast so far. And this is
Me too.
great. Yeah, this is incredible. So, yeah, and then there was a bit of time spent in Darwin as well.
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah, my wife had she'd studied a course and she graduated at the top of her class and won awards. And it's a pretty common Tasmanian story that things are kind of stitched up. You know, if you're not in the circle, you can't get into the circle. And she'd applied for more than 100 jobs over a year, here and interstate, and just couldn't get a foot in the door. And one Sunday morning she said, "Have you thought about working anywhere else in Australia?" And the thought hadn't crossed my mind. And I went, maybe I'll see what I can find. So I opened up the laptop and typed in to a search engine, music job Australia. And the first one that came up was in the top end. And it said, Tasmanian College, music teacher, email for more information. And I was like, there's no information in this. What's Tasmanian, and is it full time, and when does it start? Anyway, so I emailed on a Sunday and rapidly got a response from the principal that said, "Can we chat?" And I was like, "On a Sunday? Okay, sure." Had a conversation, and about 5 minutes in, she said, "Well, you sound great. Are you up here?" And I went, "No, I'm very much not up here. I'm down here." And she said, "Oh, that's fine. We'll fly you up." And I said, "Oh, I've got a wife and 2 kids. Oh, we'll fly them up too. I've got a house and a car and a piano. We'll put them on a train. It'll be fine." Wow. I went, "Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, let's give it a crack." So by Sunday afternoon, we were moving to Darwin.
Oh my gosh.
And that's where my wife got started in her career as a planner, and that's really where I found my voice as a poet. Because the weather up there, well, everything up there wants to kill you. I don't know if you've ever been to Darwin. Everything up there wants to kill you. Crocodiles, jellyfish, lightning bolts, drunk people. So the weather was so hostile to my instruments, I couldn't just keep them hanging on the wall like I did down here. I had to keep them in the guitar case under the bed so they wouldn't get mouldy and rusty. And I was like, well, if I can't play music, then what do I do? And it turns out I enjoy writing words more than I enjoy finding melodies.
Well, I reckon there'd be a fair few stories from the top, the top end, just the history and everything going on there.
For sure. It was weird being in a place where, because of Cyclone Tracy, almost everything is younger than me. Like all the buildings are new. That's very different to Tasmania, where everything's sandstone or made by convicts or, Aboriginal stories. Yeah, in Darwin, I mean, the land is 1 billion years old, but the buildings themselves feel like they were made yesterday and might get knocked over tomorrow.
Wow.
That was different.
Yeah. And then, so from there, and then that just ran its course and you guys found yourself back in Tasmania?
Kinda. Well, my kids were 6 and 8 when we moved up there. And, life happens and kids get to a certain age where you can't just drag them around like a handbag anymore. They've kind of got their lives. And the oldest one was getting towards high school, and we're like, do we put our roots down here or do we need to go? And we're sort of looking down the road of maybe this and maybe that. And I distinctly remember one evening out on the deck after dinner saying to my kids, if you had a choice, and they both said, Tassie. I hadn't even finished the question or given any context, so that was very much in the front of their thinking that this is where they want to be. This is where their cousins are, it's where their grandparents and their great-grandparents were. That was a real surprise. I thought that Darwin was home for them, but it turns out that here was home. So, we kept our eyes and hearts open to the change and found our way back.
Well, yeah. Well, glad and the stars aligned with this podcast tonight, because I saw a post of yours a while ago talking about, now, definitely forgive me if I'm wrong, it was talking about this particular gig that we're at tonight, which I'm lucky enough to perform at, and just by chance you were the MC.
Yeah.
But you had a post saying that it was something like maybe one of your first ever gigs were here, or when you were back in Tasmania, something like that.
Yeah. I played in this exact venue, Canadian Folk Club, in April, and it was the 20th anniversary of my first gig.
Wow.
Like almost to the day. It was April 5th, 2004, and I played on April 6th, 2024. So I did a 20-year retrospective, which is such a grown-up thing to say.
Yeah.
Isn't 20? That's such a grown-up number. I don't know how you operate, but I kind of make a thing, and then it's done, and I put it over there, and then I make another thing, and it's done, and I put it over there. And I don't really look over my shoulder to see the breadcrumb trail as to what I've created and who I've become. So 20 years, to even think of that as a number was a shock. I'd never really kept track of that. And to go, oh, wow, I'm an old person. In the music world, there are not many people my age still doing it. They tend to drop off. So that was a real special moment to be able to stop and take stock and look at the journey I've been on and how it's brought me to here. And all through whatever songs are, through songs. What a mystery they are. I wrote a song, and then it sort of becomes a stepping stone to the next song, you know? And then you can look back and go, wow, look at all those stepping stones. It was a really special night.
Yeah, that's great. You can round it out all back here, and then, so lucky that, I get to come and perform here tonight as well. But now you're the MC as well. So how did that come around?
Quite intentionally. I read a book, a friend of mine recommended it to me. It's called Falling Upwards. And it's about the first half of life and the second half of life, which isn't necessarily an age that you turn or anything like that, but it's different ways of living. So the first half of life is you're kind of working out who you are and what you care about and who you want to be with. You're kind of building your house, you know, metaphorically. You're kind of building a place where you want to be with people that you want to be with. And the second half of life is welcoming other people into that, including other people in and being kind of an elder or a mentor, or helping to create opportunities for people who are in the first half of life. So in the first half of life, everyone knows what that looks like for musicians. We all want to be rock stars forever. But at some point you need to be the old growth in the forest to give a bit of shade for the young growth. So I was quite intentional that, you know, I know how to make music and how to do gigs and how to do recordings, but I really had almost no one when I was getting started. And it was a lonely road, and it was very difficult, and it took a long time, and it shouldn't have been that hard. So I wanted to be helpful for younger performers, people who are, you know, not so confident, to help create an opportunity for them to find their voice and find their way. And this was here, and I was friends with the organisers, and I said, if there's ever an opportunity, I'd love to help make that happen. So this is part of my new way of being creative.
Becoming part of the old growth.
Yeah, part of the old growth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very insightful and awesome way of looking at it, you know, because I know, as you said, a lot of musicians want to be rock stars their whole lives, you know, and sort of pushing their own agenda probably a lot, and, you know, probably not taking that step back to think of, well, you know, how to give back. And, you know, I think on the journey of the Concrete Connection project, a lot of it, you know, the things I'm discovering, which is beneficial to mental health, is particularly community and giving back and service, you know. Yeah, so that's a perfect sort of segue into what this podcast is mainly about, and that is mental health. And the main question I've been asking people is, you know, what does mental health mean to you?
Yeah. I feel it's a really helpful term, but I feel like we're on the edge. We're stepping into a new way of understanding what it means to be a healthy person. Even the idea of mental health when I was growing up was I'd never heard that word. The idea that your mind could be unhealthy just didn't make any sense. But it's a helpful term now, but I still feel like it's pretty limited. In the same way that when I go to the doctor, they don't just say, how's your health? There's so many parts of my body that they want to know is okay. You know, like how are your joints? How's your heart? How are your lungs? What about your stress levels, your digestion. Do you have any problems with body hair? There's so many parts of being a person. And mental health to me feels like one small fraction of what, as an idea. I think that's going to grow as we understand. It's not just, lots of people talk about mental health as if it's just how you feel, So if you're not depressed, therefore your mental health is good. But it's more than that. It's how you see the world. You're looking out
that's
as
a
a
good
soul,
one.
And if you look out at the world and you're convinced that the world hates you or that there's no place for you, but you're not sad about it, well, that's not healthy, Or if you think you're really special and the world just needs to catch up with it, catch up to your view of the world, well, that's not healthy either. It's still not diagnosable, but it's kind of like you've got these glasses on and they need a bit of a clean, That's something I've really noticed of late, is it's not just about how you feel, it's how you see and how you interpret what's going on.
I love that. And that's one thing that hasn't come up. This is, the 10th episode I done of this, but no one, that hasn't really come up that it's, a perspective thing as well as a feeling thing.
I think it is for me, because, my mental health, if there was a spectrum of ecstatically happy and morbidly sad, I'm probably more down that end of the spectrum. Not morbidly sad, but I tend to have a kind of sorrow or a melancholy, and I think that's just how I am.
I think that's okay too.
Yeah, it was a burden when I was younger, but it was kind of like I grew some muscles and now I'm strong enough to carry that around, And so it doesn't trouble me when I'm sad about things or if I'm troubled about things, whereas other people might be, just cheer up. And I was like, no, this is just me. This is, I feel sad about things that are happening, and I have dreams, like I wake up from a dream and I'll cry and then I'll brush my teeth and get on with the day. That's quite normal for me to do that. And other people will be like, you don't need to cry about that. I was like, no, maybe you don't, but I do. It's just a thing. And if I don't do that, well, that feeling stays in me, and it's not supposed to stay there. So that's, that kind of sadness isn't necessarily a mental health problem for me. That's why I make songs and write poems, is because I feel things deeply. I have a very, some would say, oversensitive nature, but I'm very sensitive to what's going on. So I make things about it. Sometimes that is too much, and the red flag for me is if I get cynical. If my words are hurting other people, that's a mental health red flag for me, because I know I'm feeling sad, but now I want you to feel sad as well, and that's not okay. And that I've been there before, and I'm kind of there now at the moment. I've got to be really careful with what I say, because I'm kind of a bit snappy, right? So I'm old enough and wise enough to go, okay, just be careful when you're talking with people. Don't let that cynicism out, because it's not helpful for you, it's not helpful for them. Just sit tight and this will pass. Yeah,
well, that's another thing that's probably self-awareness, self-aware to do that, because maybe in the past or younger selves or younger other people might continue on that path. So realizing that, adjusting, cleaning those glasses off. Is perfect.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what it is for me. It's taken me a long time to work myself out, and the older I get, the more there'll be to work out. I don't pretend that this works for everybody, and I'm not saying that if you're depressed, well, Daniel said he's depressed all the time and he's fine with it. It's not quite what I'm saying, but that's what my life is, and it works for me. Yeah,
and that's it. And we're all different on all different paths and things like that as well. You did say one thing about, creating, and that helps. And I think, we've talked about it before, like stories, telling them, listening to them, reading them, and writing them, I think is an incredible way to help with those feelings when you are sad, because we've talked about it before, about putting it out, taking it out of the system, putting it on the paper or putting it into a poem or a song, beneficial. Do you agree with that?
For sure. And I think in our consumerist culture, it's so easy to get confused about what that creativity is for. People think that I write songs and record them so that they can buy them or so that they can download them. But for me, that's a byproduct of the whole process. The process is more important than the product at the end. The reason I write songs, the reason I write poems is because I need to write songs and poems. And if I don't, then that's a mental health crisis for me. That's, without being too crass, that's me getting constipated. You know, you've got to get it out. And so I'm kind of not that attached to the work once it's done. It's just out of me.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
And people are like, oh, I must be excited to have the new album. I'm like, it's really not for me. That's the exciting bit was a long time ago. When I wrote the song, I went, there it is. That's what I wanted to say. And it sounds better out than it was in. That for me is the moment. And singing it to other people and having them respond, that's a wonderful thing. But if no one ever hears them, that's okay too. It's not, that was never the point. If I'm trying to create for other people, I'll tie myself in knots. But I'm not here to sell music. I'm just here to let music and poetry pass through me.
Wow. I think we could tell actually all night, and people are milling in now because we do have a folk night to MC and to perform at. So I'm just wondering how we can continue this further down the track and keep it going. Maybe a Zoom meeting or something, because I find I'm learning a lot. And it's been a great chat, but we're starting to fill up in here and people need to take their seats. So I really appreciate you taking the time for a chat, and I'm excited that we get to hang out for the rest of the night.
Yeah, likewise.
And listen to some music.
Thanks heaps, Ben.
Yeah, appreciate it, Daniel. Thanks, mate.